How does it feel to be useless, Dad? My wife's son laughed in front of my wife's entire family. I looked at him calmly and said, "It feels great, because I just stopped paying your fees." His face went pale. My wife choked and screamed, "Fees? What fees?" There's a special kind of silence that falls right after someone detonates a social grenade at a family dinner. It's not peaceful. It's not calm. It's that eerie, slow-motion kind of silence where you can literally hear people trying to breathe quietly so they don't get caught in the explosion. That was the sound echoing across the Carter family's polished mahogany dining table when I said, "It feels great, because I just stopped paying your college fees." Let's rewind. A few minutes earlier, everything looked like a Hallmark commercial for generational wealth. The chandelier was dripping light onto gold-trimmed plates. Melissa, my wife, was glowing like a trophy wife in her red satin dress, and her son, Brandon, sat across from me with that permanent smirk that made me wonder if sarcasm was hereditary. Her relatives, all Manhattan money and no manners, were sipping Merlot and pretending they were born with their noses that high. I was the outsider, the engineer from Brooklyn who somehow scored an invite to the aristocrats' table. The only reason they tolerated me was because I paid for things. They loved me the way a vending machine loves a dollar bill. Then Brandon, my wife's 22-year-old pride and joy, decided dinner needed some spice. "So, Dad," he said, loud enough for the room to hush, "how does it feel to be completely useless?" He laughed, his voice echoing off the chandelier. And just like that, everyone else joined in, forced, polite laughter that screamed, "We hate this guy, but we love drama." I glanced at Melissa, expecting her to stop him, maybe tell her boy to shut his Harvard wannabe mouth. Instead, she sipped her wine and smirked, like she'd just watched a rerun of Keeping Up with the Stepdads. I could feel my jaw tighten. I'd been silent for years about the disrespect, the snide comments, the way her family treated me like the hired help with benefits. But that night, something inside me just cracked. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired enough to be calm. So I smiled. Calm. Casual. The kind of smile you give before you destroy someone's entire worldview. "It feels great," I said, "because I just stopped paying your college fees." For half a second, Brandon thought I was joking. Then I saw it. The way his smirk started to melt, the confidence draining from his face faster than a TikTok trend. He blinked, looked at his mother, then back at me. "Wait, what?" Melissa's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "Fees? What fees?" she asked, her voice an octave higher, her eyes narrowing like I'd just confessed to a crime. Around us, forks clinked, chairs shifted. Her sister Heather leaned in, whispering like we were at some royal scandal. "He means the college fees, Melissa." Melissa turned to me, her lips pressed tight. "Luke, explain. Now." "Oh, so now I was Luke. Funny, 5 minutes ago, I was Honey." I leaned back, cool as the iced water I was about to enjoy. "Sure," I said. "For the past 6 years, I've been covering Brandon's tuition, housing, meal plans, you name it. Because someone," I glanced at her, "told me it was just temporary." The air thickened with disbelief. Melissa's eyes darted to Brandon. "You said your father was paying for college," she snapped. Brandon's face went pale. He was, well, I thought." His brain was buffering, and watching him crash was the best entertainment I'd had all year. Her mother, Evelyn, gasped like she'd just been told her martini wasn't top shelf. "Luke, are you saying you've been paying all this time?" I smiled politely. "That's exactly what I'm saying, Evelyn. Every semester, every textbook, every study trip to Miami, my credit card got the privilege." She clutched her pearls. "But Melissa said," "I know what Melissa said," I interrupted. And I believed her. "My mistake," Heather whispered to her husband. "Oh my God, this is better than cable." Melissa slammed her fork down. "You should have told me," she snapped. "Told you?" I echoed. "I tried. Remember when I said we should discuss finances, and you said, 'Money talk ruins the vibe'? Well, surprise. The vibe's officially ruined." Brandon opened his mouth, probably to apologize or to make it worse. It's always 50-50 with him, but I held up my hand. "Don't. Not tonight." Inside, I was oddly calm. No yelling, no dramatic exits, no storming off. I'd already exited this marriage emotionally a long time ago. This dinner was just the rerun where I finally got to deliver my best line. Melissa stood up, her voice trembling between fury and panic. So what now, Luke? You just stop paying? Do you want him to fail? I shrugged. I want him to grow up. There's a difference. The silence that followed was the kind that humbles people. Even the chandelier seemed to dim out of respect. Brandon mumbled something about needing air and stumbled out. Heather whispered, "That's going to trend on TikTok if someone filmed it." Evelyn muttered, "I told her not to marry beneath her tax bracket." I turned to her and smiled. "And yet here we are. You're welcome for the tuition receipts." When the awkwardness became unbearable, I stood. "Thank you for dinner," I said, straightening my jacket. The steak was under-seasoned, but the drama? Perfectly cooked. Melissa glared at me like she wanted to hurl the centerpiece across the table. "You've embarrassed this family." I smirked. "No, Melissa. I just stopped financing the illusion." I walked out, calm and collected, leaving behind the stunned silence of a family who'd just realized the ATM had left the building. The night air outside was freezing, but I felt warm, liberated even. The chauffeur at the mansion gate asked if I needed my car brought around. I said, "No thanks, I'll walk." It felt symbolic, me walking away from the gilded cage I'd been trapped in for 6 years. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. "You made a fool of yourself." I typed back, "No, I just revealed the fool factory." As I walked through the Manhattan streets, the city lights reflected on the wet pavement, and I thought about how funny life gets when you finally stop pretending. I'd spent years trying to fit into a family that measured worth by bank accounts and last names. I thought love could bridge the gap between my blue-collar roots and their gold-plated expectations. Turns out, love without respect is just charity, and I was done being their benefactor. By the time I reached my car parked 3 blocks away, my phone had 15 missed calls and 6 texts from Melissa. One from Brandon too. "Dude, you ruined everything." I laughed so hard I startled a passerby. I replied, "Correction, I ended the subscription." Driving home, I didn't feel guilt or regret. I felt peace. The kind that doesn't come from forgiveness, but from finally putting your own name at the top of your priority list. The apartment felt emptier than usual, but it was a good kind of empty. No passive-aggressive silence. No requests for just one more favor. I poured myself a drink. Cheap whiskey, because irony, and toasted the night. "To freedom," I said out loud. The truth is, that dinner didn't just end my silence. It ended the version of me that believed appeasement equals love. Melissa would spin her story to her family. Brandon would sulk. Evelyn would gossip. But for the first time, I didn't care. Because that night, under a glittering chandelier and fake smiles, I'd finally chosen myself over their comfort. And let me tell you, revenge doesn't always need fire or fury. Sometimes it's just a calm sentence at a fancy dinner table that makes the whole room choke on its own arrogance. You know that moment when you think you've hit life's jackpot, but the confetti turns out to be unpaid bills and red flags you thought were Valentine's decorations? Yeah, that was me 6 years ago, standing at the altar, thinking I was marrying elegance, ambition, and emotional stability all rolled into one woman, Melissa Carter. She looked like $1,000,000, and I, Luke Henderson, a simple civil engineer from Brooklyn with calloused hands and a Costco membership, thought I was the luckiest man alive. Turns out, I wasn't marrying just Melissa. I was unknowingly signing up for a full-access subscription to the Carter Family Circus, featuring overpriced wine, emotional manipulation, and a teenager with an ego larger than the Statue of Liberty. Back then, I didn't see it. I was blinded by charm, stilettos, and the illusion that love conquers class differences. Spoiler, it doesn't. It just makes you the plot twist in a very expensive family drama. The Carters were that kind of family that didn't take vacations. They took sabbaticals. They didn't own homes. They owned properties. Their dog, a poodle named Winston, ate better than most humans. First time I met them, we were at this brunch spot in Soho, where avocado toast costs more than my car insurance. Melissa's mother, Evelyn, was sitting there like the queen of passive aggression, dabbing her mouth with a napkin that probably had a pedigree. Her sister Heather was gossiping about someone's new money boyfriend while her husband, Ted, was busy scrolling through stock tickers like a man allergic to genuine conversation. And then there was Brandon, 16, sharp-tongued, lazy, and allergic to gratitude. He had that teenage look that screamed, "I know everything, but can't work a dishwasher." He didn't call me Dad, or even Luke. Nope. For 2 years, it was Mr. Henderson, which made me feel like I'd accidentally enrolled him in one of my old college courses. When he finally switched to Dude, I almost celebrated, like I'd just been promoted from substitute teacher to unpaid Uber driver. Still, I tried to bond. Melissa said he needed a stable male role model since his biological father, Greg, was living the Florida dream, complete with palm trees, golf shirts, and zero child support. The guy's idea of parenting was liking Brandon's Instagram posts once every 3 months and leaving comments like, "So proud, champ," under selfies that looked like audition tapes for a TikTok influencer house. So I stepped in. I helped Brandon with homework he didn't care about, built him his first laptop desk, showed up at his soccer games even when he didn't play. The kid spent more time warming benches than the actual players, but there I was, cheering like he was MVP. I even bought him his first laptop, top of the line, sleek, expensive, something he used exclusively to stream YouTube and argue with strangers online about sneakers. Melissa said I was doing a good job, that I was really connecting with him. Connecting? The kid once called me financially reliable, like I was an investment portfolio. Still, I thought I was earning respect. I didn't realize I was just funding his sense of entitlement with interest. And don't even get me started on those brunches. The Carters treated brunch like a religious ceremony. I'd sit there, surrounded by people discussing which brand of truffle oil really captures Tuscany. And I'd be thinking about how much it costs to refill the gas in my truck. One time, Heather said, "Luke, you're so practical," in that tone rich people use when they mean poor. Evelyn once asked me, "So, do you enjoy your little projects?" I said, "You mean the skyscrapers I build?" She blinked like I'd said Lego sets. I swear, if sarcasm burned calories, I'd have had abs from those conversations alone. But Melissa, she was different, or at least I thought so. She was witty, charming, driven. She had a smile that could sell bottled water to a fish. She made me believe that her family's judgment didn't matter. "We were us against the world," she'd say, and I fell for it like a rookie. Our wedding was beautiful, lavish without being tacky, though Evelyn made sure everyone knew which side of the aisle had taste. I remember her saying, "Luke, don't worry about the expenses. We'll keep it elegant but simple." That woman's definition of simple included imported orchids and a champagne fountain taller than Brandon. I didn't mind, though. I was in love. And love, as it turns out, is the perfect anesthesia for common sense. Our first year of marriage wasn't terrible, mostly because I was working long hours at my firm and didn't see the cracks forming. Brandon would grunt his way through dinner. Melissa would talk about her new skincare business venture that was about to take off, and I'd nod along, thinking everything was fine. It wasn't. The warning signs were there, like how Melissa's credit card bills looked like phone books or how she'd say, "Let's invest in Brandon's future," every time she wanted me to foot another expense. But I brushed it off, because when you love someone, you mistake manipulation for teamwork. Then came the Carter family dinners, those cinematic nightmares where I played the role of the silent, supportive husband. They'd discuss yacht clubs and golf memberships while I'd quietly refill my glass, pretending not to notice that no one asked me a single question about my life. When I did speak, it was usually to answer something Evelyn said like, "So, Luke, have you thought about going back to school? Maybe get an MBA to elevate your income?" She said income like it was a disease. I wanted to respond, "Sure, Evelyn, maybe after you get a PhD and mind your own business." Instead, I smiled, like every broke sitcom dad trying to keep the peace. Brandon, meanwhile, was growing into a full-time freeloading philosopher. He'd talk about finding himself and needing freedom, like he was auditioning for a reality show called Keeping Up with My Stepdad's Money. I tried to give him advice, real-world stuff. "Get a job," I'd say. "Learn something useful." He'd roll his eyes. "Why work when mom says you got us?" That line hit harder than I let on. I'd built bridges, managed crews, solved engineering nightmares. And yet this kid genuinely thought I existed to bankroll his laziness. And Melissa, God bless her, always defended him. "He's just figuring things out," she'd say. "He's young." Yeah, well, at 16, I was working summers pouring concrete and saving for community college. Brandon's idea of working hard was staying awake through an entire podcast, but I let it slide, thinking he'll grow out of it. He didn't. He grew into it. There were moments, though, tiny flickers of the woman I fell for. We'd go out for walks or late-night drives, and she'd rest her head on my shoulder, talking about dreams and family, and I'd think maybe we'd still make it. But then she'd get a call from her mother or sister, and poof, back to Carter mode. Suddenly, we were comparing appliances, vacations, or who's donating to which charity gala. She once told me, "It's important to keep up appearances." I said, "I'd prefer to keep up with my mortgage." That didn't go over well. Still, I played along. I attended their charity events, wore overpriced suits, and smiled through condescension. People there loved to ask, "And what do you do, Luke?" I'd say, "I build things." They'd nod, then pivot to someone with a trust fund like I just told them I collect bottle caps. But Melissa would beam, squeeze my hand, and whisper, "Ignore them. You're amazing." And for a while, I believed her. Until one night, at another Carter dinner, Evelyn raised her glass and said, "To family, especially the ones who elevate us." Then she winked at Melissa and said, "You always knew how to marry well." I almost choked on my steak. Brandon laughed. "Yeah, Mom really found a sponsor." The table laughed too. I smiled, but it burned. That was the first time I realized I wasn't family. I was funding. On the drive home, I asked Melissa if she thought that comment was funny. She said, "Oh, Luke, don't take everything so personally. They joke." I said, "Yeah, and I financed the punchline." She didn't respond, just turned up the radio. That silence was my first taste of what was coming. Looking back, I don't regret marrying Melissa. I regret thinking I could buy respect from people who see generosity as weakness. They had terrible taste, not just in decor or overpriced meals, but in values. They confused luxury with worth, sarcasm with intelligence, and dependence with family. I kept thinking I'd earn my place with effort, kindness, and loyalty. But in that family, the only language that mattered was money, and even that had an accent. If you've ever been the odd one out at a rich table, you know the feeling. You start editing yourself, your jokes, your stories, your background, just to fit in. You laugh at things that aren't funny, agree with things you don't believe, and before you know it, you're performing instead of living. I became that guy, the smiling background extra in the Carter family's Instagram perfect life. But here's the kicker. I didn't know yet that my patience had an expiration date. I still thought I was building bridges, when really, I was laying down the runway they'd eventually use to fly off with my dignity. 6 years ago, I thought I married the love of my life. Turns out, I just hired myself as the CFO of the Carter Family Lifestyle Fund. But hey, at least I learned something important. When someone says, "We're in this together," always check whose name is on the bill. There are few phrases in marriage scarier than "Can we talk?" Especially when it's said in that soft, innocent tone women use right before they drop a bombshell. Melissa said it on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, wearing that same sweet smile she used to ask for new handbags. I was at my desk, knee-deep in project blueprints, when she leaned against the doorframe like a walking commercial for manipulation in heels. "Luke," she said, "can we talk?" My stomach immediately tightened. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it wasn't. "Hey, let's go get tacos." I looked up and said, "If this is about redecorating again, I'm still recovering from the last paint invoice." She laughed, a little too charmingly, and replied, "No, it's about Brandon." And there it was, the warning sign, the topic that turned every reasonable conversation into an episode of Financial Fear Factor. She walked in, sat across from me, and did that thing where she brushed her hair behind her ear, pretending to be nervous. "I was wondering," she began, "if you could help Brandon with his tuition, just for a year." She said it like she was asking me to water a plant while she was out of town. I blinked. "Tuition? You mean college tuition?" She nodded, smiling like a politician during campaign season. "He's been accepted into this amazing program. He just needs a head start. He'll get a scholarship next semester." A head start. Cute. I was about to financially jumpstart a kid whose biggest accomplishment so far was finishing a bag of Doritos without pausing his video game. "Melissa," I said carefully, "college is expensive. Like, sell a kidney expensive. Are we sure this is a good idea?" She tilted her head and touched my hand. "Luke, please. He's trying. And you've always said education is an investment." "Ah, yes, they use his own words against him maneuver. Classic." I sighed, the way every husband sighs right before signing up for emotional bankruptcy. "Okay," I said. 1 year. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're the best." Translation, "You're the easiest." The next week, I found myself wiring $2,500 a month for tuition and housing, plus whatever emergency fees popped up like uninvited guests. Brandon thanked me by borrowing my car and returning it with enough empty Red Bull cans to start a recycling business. He promised he'd take school seriously, but judging from his Instagram stories, the only thing he was studying was nightlife management. One night, I walked past his room and saw him on his laptop. "Homework?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. I looked closer. He was watching a YouTube video titled, "How to Win an Argument Without Facts." That's when I realized I was financing my own psychological warfare. Still, I told myself, it's just 1 year. 1 year of being the generous stepdad, the nice guy, the investor in potential. I figured he'd mature, start working part-time, maybe even appreciate me. Instead, I accidentally turned him into the human equivalent of a subscription service. No cancellation policy, no gratitude, just monthly payments and disappointment. A few months later, Melissa said, "Honey, the dorms are too small for him. Can we upgrade him to off-campus housing?" I asked, "You mean an apartment?" She nodded. "It's closer to class and safer." I wanted to say, safe from what? Hard work? But instead, I just sighed and agreed. I was still operating under the delusion that temporary meant short-term. I hadn't realized that in Melissa's dictionary, temporary means until you die or go broke. By year 2, Brandon was living like a trust fund prince. He'd visit home occasionally, usually when he needed something, and always with that smug grin that made me want to send him an invoice. He'd walk in, toss his keys on the counter, and say, "Hey, dude, my rent's due. Can you handle it this week?" Handle it. Like I was his accountant/butler. Melissa would overhear and chirp, "He's just stressed, Luke. He's juggling a lot." Yeah, if a lot means Netflix, naps, and never lifting a finger. By year 3, I noticed a pattern. Every time I even thought about questioning Brandon's spending, Melissa would suddenly transform into a defense attorney. "He's still growing," she'd argue. "You're too rigid." Rigid? Lady, my wallet could bend into yoga poses at this point. But love makes you stupid. It makes you pay tuition for a kid who once told his teacher, "Math is a social construct." The emotional blackmail came gift-wrapped in guilt. Melissa would say things like, "Luke, he's just not as privileged as the other kids." I'd remind her, "He's literally wearing sneakers that cost more than my first car." Didn't matter. I'd cave every time. I was addicted to peace, and paying Brandon's bills was the price of admission. Then came the extras. Oh, the extras. New iPhone because his old one doesn't support the latest update. A weekend school trip that looked suspiciously like Coachella. Emergency textbooks that somehow involved a PlayStation controller. Each expense was delivered with the same nonchalance you'd use to ask someone to pass the salt. I started to feel less like a husband and more like a malfunctioning ATM with emotional baggage. My coworker Lois noticed something was off. She's one of those people who can smell nonsense before it even hits the fan. "Luke," she said during lunch one day, "you look exhausted." I told her about the tuition, the apartment, the endless, temporary help. She raised an eyebrow. "You're not helping him, you're funding his laziness." I chuckled. "Yeah, but at least he's not asking me for a car." Lois smirked. "Oh, honey, give it time." And boy, did time deliver. Because by year 4, Melissa came home smiling like she'd just solved world hunger. "Guess what?" she said, wrapping her arms around me. "Brandon's thinking about getting a car." I froze. Thinking about it, or expecting it. She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. He's commuting a lot. It's only fair." I wanted to say, fair for who? But I bit my tongue. That's marriage in a nutshell. Biting your tongue until you taste blood and resentment. When I asked how long the help would continue, Melissa said, "Just until he's stable." Stable? The only thing stable about Brandon was his ability to drain my bank account. I started fantasizing about sending him a bill titled emotional damages and tuition refund request. By the 5th year, Brandon's temporary dependency had evolved into full-blown entitlement. He'd call me from his campus and say, "Dude, the rent's late again," like I was the one who forgot to pay. I tried to set boundaries once. Big mistake. "Brandon," I said, "you're 21 now. You should start handling some of this yourself." He laughed. "Good one. I wasn't joking. But when Melissa overheard, she pulled me aside and whispered, "You're being too harsh. He's under pressure." Under pressure? The kid's hardest decision that week was probably which flavor of vape to buy. Every time I tried to say no, Melissa treated it like a personal betrayal. "You don't love him like your own," she'd say. "Of course I do," I'd reply. "I just love my retirement plan more." She didn't laugh. Shocker. By the 6th year, my patience was hanging by a thread thinner than Brandon's work ethic. I'd been paying tuition, rent, allowances, and vacations. Meanwhile, he was still majoring in self-pity and minor inconveniences. Every month, Melissa would promise, "He'll take over soon." And every month, my credit card would laugh in my face. One day, my accountant called and said, "Luke, do you have any dependents?" I said, "Just emotionally." That was the year it finally hit me. I wasn't helping a struggling student. I was enabling a professional freeloader with a trust fund fantasy and a mother who believed love was measured in direct deposits. The whole situation felt like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it at first, but one day, you're stranded, broke, and wondering how the hell you got there. I remember one night vividly. Melissa was scrolling through her phone in bed, smiling at some text. "What's so funny?" I asked. "Oh, Brandon sent a meme," she said. "He's hilarious." I peeked over. He'd sent her a meme that said, "When your stepdad complains, but still pays." They both found it funny. Me? I felt something inside me snap, like a stretched rubber band. I smiled anyway, but it was the kind of smile that comes right before someone starts planning their quiet revenge. That night, I stared at the ceiling and realized I'd become a background character in my own life. The supporting cast, the dependable donor. I was done being temporary help. The only person who needed saving at this point was me. But of course, I didn't know yet that my exit strategy would start with a maple tree, a lawn mower, and the sweet sound of peace hitting my bank account like a refund from the universe. There's invisible, and then there's Luke Henderson at a Carter family gathering, invisible. I'm talking full-on superhero-level invisibility, minus the cool costume or origin story. You ever been in a room where people talk around you like you're a houseplant that occasionally pays bills? That was me. Melissa's family had mastered the art of pretending I didn't exist while simultaneously enjoying the financial miracles I provided. Her mother, Evelyn, the reigning queen of subtle disrespect, used to introduce me as the practical one, which in rich people language roughly translates to the poor one. I'd laugh and say, "Yeah, someone's got to balance out the glamour," but my jokes always died faster than my savings account. They'd sip wine, raise their eyebrows, and move on to safer topics, like hedge funds or yoga retreats that cost more than my first car. At these family dinners, I'd sit there like a prop husband, smiling while they bragged about their latest vacations to Tuscany or Aspen. Melissa would be in her element, laughing, glowing, dropping humble brags about her skincare business that, spoiler alert, hadn't turned a profit since Obama's first term. Brandon, of course, would waltz in late, wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He'd give me a casual "yo, dude," raid the fridge like a raccoon in designer sneakers, and vanish. When I'd call him out on it later, he'd shrug. "Relax, man. It's just food. Just food. Right." And the last time I checked, groceries didn't magically appear because of good vibes. Melissa's family treated me like the hired help who accidentally sat at the main table. Her brother-in-law, Ted, once asked me, "So, Luke, still working on those, what do you call them, building plans?" I said, "Yeah, Ted. Still designing actual buildings while you build debt, pretending to invest." He blinked, smiled awkwardly, and muttered something about the real estate market being unpredictable. I wanted to tell him the only thing unpredictable was his credit score, but I held back. You can't reason with people who think humility is a brand flaw. Melissa used to say I didn't get her family. She was right. I didn't get how grown adults could be that shallow without drowning. They measured worth in vacations, handbags, and who got the biggest applause at family brunches. Meanwhile, I measured mine in sweat, deadlines, and whether or not my clients stopped calling me sir by mistake. We were from different planets. She thought a bad day was when her nail appointment ran late. I thought a bad day was when a crane nearly crushed my crew. Brandon was the cherry on top of this sundae of entitlement. By now, he'd evolved from a sarcastic teenager into a full-fledged man-child with an ego bigger than the Wi-Fi bill. Every time he opened his mouth, I half expected background music from a reality TV show to start playing. He'd show up unannounced, wearing ripped jeans that looked like they lost a fight with a lawnmower, and talk about his future like he was pitching a Netflix series. "I'm going to start a podcast," he told me once, "about how traditional education is a scam." I said, "Cool, maybe start by graduating before you expose the system." He rolled his eyes and said, "You just don't get Gen Z." I said, "No, Brandon, I get bills. They're like your tuition, never-ending." Lois, my coworker and unofficial therapist, kept warning me. "Luke, you're raising a sponge," she said over coffee one afternoon. "He's not even your kid, and he's draining you dry." I laughed it off. "Yeah, but Melissa says he's still figuring himself out." Lois leaned in. "If he figures himself out any slower, they'll name a new geological era after him." I loved Lois's brutal honesty. She had this way of saying the quiet part out loud, the stuff I didn't want to admit. Because deep down, I knew she was right. Brandon wasn't growing. He was coasting, and I was the wind beneath his freeloading wings. I remember one particularly painful Thanksgiving. Evelyn decided to host it at her mansion, a place so big it had an elevator just for luggage. The table looked like a luxury brand catalog, all crystal glasses and imported cutlery. I brought a pumpkin pie I'd actually baked myself, thinking maybe, just maybe, this would earn me some human points. Evelyn took one look at it and said, "Oh, how quaint." Melissa smiled like she agreed. Heather whispered something to her husband, and they both chuckled. I wanted to take my pie, my dignity, and my keys and leave. But instead, I sat there carving turkey for people who wouldn't carve out 5 minutes to treat me with respect. After dinner, Brandon made a toast, or tried to. He tapped his glass and said, "Here's to Mom for being amazing, Grandma for always being classy, and Luke for, well, being consistent." Laughter erupted around the table. I smiled tightly. Consistent. Yeah, that's one word for it. Reliable, dependable, and invisible. Just how they liked me. Later that night, Melissa said I should lighten up. "They were just teasing," she said. "You know how my family is." I replied, "Yeah, they're consistently awful." She didn't like that. I slept on the couch for 2 nights after that one. The irony is, at work I was respected. My team looked up to me, clients trusted me. Even the new interns listened when I spoke. But at home, I was background noise. I'd get home after 12-hour days managing construction projects and still get side-eyed for not joining a Zoom dinner with her family. Melissa once said, "You could at least pretend to enjoy their company." I said, "I already do. That's why I keep my mouth shut." Then there was the car situation. Brandon had just turned 20, and apparently, the world had ended because he didn't have his own vehicle. Melissa came to me with that familiar, "let's be reasonable" tone. "Luke," she said, "he's responsible now. He needs mobility for classes." I laughed so hard I nearly inhaled my coffee. Mobility? The kid can barely move off the couch. But I knew how this story ended. It always ended with me swiping my card. I bought him a used Honda Civic. Clean, reliable, decent. The next week, he showed up with a smug grin and a sticker on the back that read "Stepdad Sponsored." Melissa thought it was funny. I thought it was a cry for a DNA test. Her family loved the car idea, though. "How generous of you, Luke," Evelyn said at brunch. "I hope you're teaching him to appreciate the finer things." I smiled. "Oh, I am. He's learning to appreciate things I pay for." The table went quiet. Melissa glared at me under the table like she was sending telepathic death threats. I just took another sip of my coffee. Over time, I realized I wasn't just invisible. I was a walking wallet with a mute button. I tried being kind, patient, understanding, but all it did was make me a target for more help requests. Every time I said no, Melissa would twist it into an emotional crime. "You're supposed to be the adult," she'd say. "He looks up to you." I'd say, "If he's looking up to me, maybe he should try standing on his own 2 feet." That one got me a week of passive-aggressive silence, which, honestly, I didn't hate. Silence was better than lectures about family unity. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the way Melissa's family made me question my own worth. They'd talk about Brandon's potential, how he was creative, intuitive, different. I'd think, yeah, different from people who actually work. Every time I tried to talk about my own accomplishments, a completed skyscraper, a bridge renovation, they'd smile politely and change the subject to Brandon's music phase. He once bought a $600 guitar and played it twice. Evelyn said, he has a gift. I said, yeah, for spending. I started keeping a mental ledger, not of money, but of respect. Every insult, every backhanded compliment, every time I was dismissed or ignored, it all went into the ledger. And one day, I looked at that invisible list and thought, they don't see me, but they sure as hell will feel me when I'm gone. Still, I kept up appearances. I attended the family events, smiled through the disrespect, and played my part. Because that's what you do when you're trying to save something that's already halfway dead. But deep down, something in me was shifting. Every eye roll from Brandon, every snide remark from Evelyn, every time Melissa laughed at my expense, it all chipped away at the man I used to be. The man who believed love and effort could fix anything. Lois noticed it before I did. You're quieter these days, she said one afternoon. I shrugged. Just tired. She looked at me for a long moment and said, you're not tired, Luke. You're disappearing. That hit me harder than I expected. Because she was right. I wasn't living anymore. I was enduring. And that's the thing about invisibility. At first, it's peaceful. Then it becomes suffocating. I didn't know it yet, but the quiet man they all ignored was about to make the loudest move of his life. All it would take was one dinner, one insult too many, and one calm smile that would finally make them see me, not as their invisible provider, but as the man who stopped paying for their illusions. If there's one thing I've learned from 6 years of being a stepdad/financier, it's that responsibility means something very different in the Carter household. To me, it's about paying bills, showing up, and not setting your kitchen on fire. To Brandon, it apparently meant getting a car because he deserved independence. When he turned 20, the kid waltzed into the kitchen one morning wearing that smug grin he inherited from his mother's side and said, Luke, I think it's time I got a car. I looked up from my coffee, half awake, and said, oh, cool. Do you want to ride to the dealership? I hear they're hiring. He didn't laugh. Melissa did, sort of. But it wasn't the kind of laugh that meant, haha, my husband's funny. It was the kind that meant, haha, my husband doesn't know what's about to happen. Luke, she said sweetly, he's serious. He's commuting a lot. It's getting hard for him. I blinked. Hard for him? The kid's only exercise is scrolling TikTok with one hand and lifting my wallet with the other. She sighed. Don't be like that. You're always saying young men need to be responsible. This is a step toward that. Sure, because nothing screams responsibility like being handed a car when you can't even refill the gas in your mother's. But I bit my tongue. I'd learned that saying no to Melissa was like declaring war on the United Nations, emotionally expensive and guaranteed to backfire. A week later, I was standing in front of a used car lot, trying to convince myself this wasn't the dumbest financial decision I'd ever made. The salesman smelled blood in the water the second he saw me. Buying for the young man? He asked, nodding toward Brandon, who was busy filming a TikTok beside a silver Civic like he was auditioning for Fast and Furious student loans. I said, yeah, something affordable. The salesman grinned. Affordable's a mindset. I wanted to say, so is fraud, but I kept quiet and signed the papers. Brandon took the keys, grinning like he'd just been knighted. Thanks, man. You're the best. I waited for I'll pay you back someday. It never came. 2 days later, I walked out to the driveway and saw the car sporting a bumper sticker that said Stepdad Sponsored. I stood there for a good 30 seconds, blinking, trying to decide whether to laugh or drive it straight into a lake. Melissa came out, saw me staring, and said, oh, isn't that funny? I turned to her and said, hilarious. Should I get one that says Bank of Henderson, open 24/7? She frowned. You're being dramatic. Right. Because the only thing more dramatic than being publicly mocked by your stepson is not finding it funny enough. Meanwhile, the tuition payments kept rolling in like a subscription I forgot to cancel. Every month, $2,500 gone, poof. Like a magician's trick I didn't agree to. Whenever I raised an eyebrow, Melissa would wave it off. He'll take over soon, she'd say. He's just adjusting. Adjusting to what exactly? Luxury? Laziness? The shock of having everything handed to him? 6 years later, the only thing Brandon had adjusted to was my credit limit. I started to realize the entire family treated Luke's money like a renewable resource, like solar energy powered by guilt. Then came the call from my accountant, which was somehow both hilarious and depressing. Mr. Henderson, he said, Just confirming. You have one dependent, correct? I laughed bitterly. Just emotionally, I said. But he's 22, and I think it's time for him to move out of my tax bracket. The accountant chuckled awkwardly, clearly unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. I hung up and stared at my finances for a long time. Tuition, car insurance, maintenance, allowance, phone bills. It was like watching my paycheck get mugged in slow motion. But here's the thing about people like Melissa's family. They have audacity for breakfast. I once overheard her mother, Evelyn, telling her bridge club, "Luke is such a stable man." Melissa was smart to marry someone practical. Practical. That word again. It's the rich person version of you clean up nicely for someone from the middle class. Heather, her sister, chimed in. Yes, but stability isn't everything. Melissa's the star of that relationship. I wanted to burst in and say, "You're right. She's the star. I'm just the producer funding her movie." But I didn't. I just quietly canceled Evelyn's annual Christmas wine delivery. Small victories. Meanwhile, Brandon's idea of gratitude was borrowing my tools, breaking half of them, and returning them with a shrug. One afternoon, I found him in the garage with the Civic's hood open, blasting rap music and claiming he was learning car maintenance. I asked what he was doing. He said, changing the oil. I peeked in. He was pouring coolant into the engine. I didn't stop him. I just watched, silently, as natural consequences did what parenting couldn't. 2 days later, the car wouldn't start. He texted me, "Dude, it's dead. Need help?" I replied, "You should call a responsible adult." He responded with a question mark. I left him on read. Melissa was furious when she found out. "You should have helped him," she snapped. "He's trying." I said, "If trying means killing an engine, he's doing great." She glared at me. "You're cold sometimes, Luke." I smiled. "No, just finally at room temperature after 6 years of being set on fire." That didn't go over well. The next family dinner was another masterclass in passive-aggressive theater. Evelyn asked, "How's Brandon's car?" I smiled and said, "Dead, but at least it died doing what it loved, burning my money." The table went silent for a beat before Heather fake laughed. Melissa shot me a warning glare. I didn't care anymore. Every time I opened my mouth, I felt a little piece of my spine grow back. At work, my friend Lois could tell I was nearing my breaking point. "You've got that about to flip a table energy," she said one morning. I sighed. "Lois, I think I'm officially the world's first financially abused stepdad." She sipped her coffee. "Honey, you were that 3 years ago." I laughed. "Yeah, well, I'm finally ready to file for emotional bankruptcy." She leaned forward. "So what are you going to do?" I smiled. "I don't know yet, but it's going to be quiet, classy, and unforgettable." The real turning point came one night when Brandon waltzed into the living room while I was watching TV. He had the nerve to say, "Hey, man, can you send my rent early this month? I've got plans." I muted the TV. "Plans?" He nodded. "Spring break. Cancun." I stared at him. "Cancun? You're asking me to fund a vacation while I'm sitting here eating reheated spaghetti." He shrugged. "You only live once, man." I smiled. "Yeah, and some of us live responsibly." He blinked, clearly not catching the insult. Melissa walked in just in time to see me shaking my head. "Luke," she said, "don't ruin his excitement." I said, "I'm not. I'm just calculating how many margaritas my next paycheck will buy him." That was the moment something shifted. I realized there was no saving this setup. No amount of patience, reason, or tuition payments would buy me respect. The more I gave, the less they saw me. I wasn't Luke the husband or Luke the mentor. I was just Luke the sponsor. So I stopped talking. I started planning. I smiled through dinners, nodded at requests, and quietly began cutting the strings one by one. The tuition payments, the allowances, the emergency transfers, gone, all redirected to a new account I called the Peace Fund. 6 years of being the nice guy had taught me something valuable. People don't appreciate silent generosity. They expect it. They only notice when you stop. And oh, they were about to notice. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't fight. I just waited. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's financial. And when the bills came due, so would the truth. There are moments in life when you stop mid-step and realize the joke's been on you the whole time. Mine happened under the big maple tree in my front yard on a Saturday evening that smelled like cut grass, gasoline, and midlife awakening. I was pushing the mower, pretending not to think about my collapsing marriage or my stepson's Cancun vacation, when it hit me. Literally, the mower sputtered, coughed, and died right at my feet, like it too had finally decided it was done supporting ungrateful people. I leaned on the handle, wiped sweat off my forehead, and laughed to myself. You and me both, buddy. For years, I'd been mowing through problems, neat rows of compromise, trimmed edges of denial. But that night, staring at that stubborn mower, I realized something fundamental. I was done. Done financing delusions. Done being the family ATM. Done carrying a household that treated me like an optional subscription service. It started earlier that day when I met my old friend Jake at the diner on 9th and Elm, the kind of place that smells like bacon grease and broken dreams. Jake was the type of friend who didn't sugarcoat anything. If you wanted comfort, you called your mom. If you wanted truth, you called Jake. He slid into the booth across from me, wearing that smirk that said he already knew something was wrong. So, he said, stirring his coffee, how's life in the Carter Kingdom? I groaned. I'd rather live in a cardboard box. At least the rent would be cheaper. He chuckled. Still financing the prince's education? 6 years and counting, I said, stabbing my eggs with more force than necessary. Tuition, rent, car, phone, probably his sunscreen for Cancun. Jake whistled. Buddy, you're not a stepdad. You're an investor in a failing startup called Brandon Incorporated. That line hit me harder than the coffee did. I laughed, but not the funny kind. The kind where you realize your life could be a stand-up routine if it weren't so tragic. Jake leaned in. Let me guess, Melissa says it's temporary. I nodded. Every year. And Brandon still treats you like a background character? If background characters had to pay tuition, yeah. Jake shook his head. You know what your problem is, Luke? You're playing a game that's rigged. You're trying to win respect from people who only know how to measure generosity in dollars. He wasn't wrong. The Carters treated gratitude like a foreign language, and I'd spent years trying to translate. We talked for another hour. Well, Jake talked. I just stared into my coffee, realizing how ridiculous it all sounded when said out loud. By the time we left the diner, I'd made a decision. Not a loud one. Not one of those movie moments where the hero flips a table and storms out. No, mine was quieter. Simpler. I was going to stop paying Brandon's tuition. Just stop. No warning, no explanation, no angry confrontation. Just cold, hard reality stepping in to do what lectures never could. That evening, back home, I opened my laptop, logged into the university's payment portal, and canceled the automatic payments. The little confirmation message popped up. Your payment plan has been discontinued. It felt better than therapy. I sat there grinning, sipping a beer, feeling like I'd just released myself from financial purgatory. Melissa was out shopping with her sister, probably debating between 2 overpriced purses. Brandon was somewhere pretending to study. The house was quiet, and for once, it didn't feel empty. It felt free. Then I walked outside to mow the lawn, because that's what men do when they're processing existential revelations. We do chores. The maple tree in our yard stood tall, its branches swaying like it already knew something monumental had happened. I started the mower, and as I went up and down the yard, I thought about all the ways I'd been played. Melissa's "Can we talk?" moments, Brandon's guilt trips, Evelyn's fake politeness. It all felt like one long, expensive prank. And I'd been the punchline. But as that machine hummed, something clicked. I didn't feel angry. I felt light. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the respect. Or the lack thereof. I'd built bridges, skyscrapers, and reputations, but in that house, I couldn't even build basic appreciation. Every effort, every check, every compromise, it all vanished into that family's black hole of entitlement. And yet, here I was, finally realizing that the only person I truly owed anything to was myself. Halfway through mowing, my phone buzzed. Melissa. I let it go to voicemail. Then it buzzed again, and again. Finally, I shut it off. The mower was loud. The sky was painted with that orange glow that makes you nostalgic for no reason, and the world felt peaceful. For once, I didn't feel like the villain in my own story. I was the guy finally closing the tab after everyone else ordered the lobster. After I finished, I sat under the maple tree, looking at the house I'd paid for, the yard I maintained, the family I supported, and realized how absurd it all was. I'd been so busy proving my worth that I forgot I already had it. The silence was different that night. It wasn't lonely. It was earned. The kind of silence that says, "You've done enough." That's when I opened a new savings account on my phone. I called it the Peace Fund. Every dollar that used to go into Brandon's college now went there instead. I started small, just one payment's worth, but it felt symbolic. Every transfer was like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. I even added a little note to the account's description, for when freedom calls. I laughed at my own cheesiness, but it felt right. Melissa came home later, bags in hand, smelling like department store perfume and denial. "Hey," she said casually, "did you transfer Brandon's tuition today?" He said the school emailed him. I smiled without looking up from my beer. "Nope." She froze. "What do you mean, nope?" I turned to her and said, I'm done. He's 22. Time for him to start paying his own way." Her jaw dropped like I'd just confessed to a murder. "Luke, you can't just stop." "I can," I said, and I did. She went quiet, that dangerous kind of quiet that usually precedes an argument. "You're being heartless," she finally said. I chuckled. "No, I'm just budgeting emotions the same way I should have budgeted my money." She glared. "You'll regret this." I took a sip of my beer. "Maybe, but at least it'll be a cheap regret." She stormed off, probably to call Evelyn for emotional reinforcements. I didn't follow. I didn't even feel the urge to argue. I just sat back under that tree, the night air cool against my skin, and thought about Jake's words. "You're playing a game that's rigged." He was right, but not anymore. I'd finally flipped the board. Over the next few weeks, I watched as small changes started rippling through my life. Melissa grew distant, more irritable. Brandon texted less, probably because his phone plan was next on my hit list. The house grew quieter, and while the silence used to sting, now it sounded like peace. Every time I looked at my growing peace fund, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just money. It was proof that I could take back control without shouting, without drama, without revenge. Just silence. The kind that costs nothing but means everything. Under that maple tree, I made myself a promise. No more explaining, no more defending, no more apologizing for not being enough for people who didn't even see what I'd already given. From now on, I'd measure success not by how much I spent, but by how little I tolerated. And man, that realization, simple, quiet, and long overdue, was worth every dollar I'd ever lost. Some dinners are meant for celebration. Others are designed by fate to end relationships, expose lies, and remind you why you should always eat before attending family functions. This one was the latter. Melissa's mother, Evelyn, had invited the entire Carter clan to her mansion for a pre-holiday dinner, which in Carter language meant a gathering where everyone pretends to like each other while subtly competing over who's richer. I wasn't planning to go, honestly. After 6 years of being the family's invisible financier, I'd mastered the art of faking migraines. But Melissa insisted. "It's important," she said, straightening my tie like she was prepping me for a deposition. "Everyone will be there." I smiled. "Great, so there'll be witnesses." I showed up wearing my best suit, not designer, but well-fitted and honest, kind of like me. Melissa, on the other hand, looked like a walking Christmas card in a red dress that could have paid off one of Brandon's overdue tuition installments. The mansion was buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint aroma of pretension. Evelyn greeted me with her usual mix of disdain and politeness. "Luke," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "You look practical." Translation: "You look cheap but clean." I smiled. "And you look expensive but tired." She blinked. "What was that?" I said, inspired. I lied, flashing my most diplomatic grin. Dinner was served in a dining room that looked like it had its own mortgage. Gold-rimmed plates, crystal glasses, candles tall enough to signal ships. I took my seat at the far end of the table, directly across from Brandon, who was already half drunk on confidence and whatever imported wine he'd borrowed. He leaned back, smirking, wearing a blazer that screamed, "Funded by someone else." I noticed his Rolex immediately, the one I hadn't bought, which meant someone else's wallet had stepped in. Probably mine, indirectly. The small talk started like it always did, with Evelyn bragging about Heather's latest nonprofit project, which was mostly tax deductions and Instagram posts. Melissa chimed in about her business's expansion, conveniently skipping the part where I'd paid for the last marketing campaign. I sipped my wine quietly, counting down the minutes until dessert, freedom, or death, whichever came first. Then Brandon, ever the showman, decided to grab the spotlight. "So, Luke," he said, his voice echoing just enough to grab everyone's attention, "how does it feel to be completely useless?" The words dropped like a brick through glass. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze. Somewhere, a violinist probably stopped playing in another zip code out of respect for the silence that followed. Melissa's face twitched. She didn't say anything, just hid behind her wine glass like a coward. Evelyn's lips curled into what might have been a smirk if Botox hadn't taken the day off. Heather laughed nervously, whispering to her husband, "He's just joking." But Brandon wasn't. His grin was too sharp, too proud. He wanted to humiliate me. Right there, in front of everyone. I didn't move. Didn't even blink. I just smiled. The kind of calm, measured smile that made people nervous because they couldn't tell if I was amused or plotting. I set my fork down gently, dabbed my mouth with my napkin, and said, "It feels great." Brandon tilted his head, confused. "What?" I leaned back, meeting his smug gaze. "It feels great, because I just stopped paying your college fees." If silence had a weight, that room would have collapsed under it. Brandon's smirk disintegrated faster than his GPA. His fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto the plate. Melissa's eyes widened, and for a brief, beautiful moment, I saw fear. Real, genuine fear in her expression. Evelyn gasped like she'd just seen someone put ketchup on steak. Heather whispered, "Fees? What fees?" Like she'd just discovered her sister wasn't actually rich. Melissa set her wine glass down a little too hard. "Luke," she said, her voice shaking, "what do you mean you stopped paying?" I shrugged, casual as ever. Exactly what it sounds like. Brandon's 22. Time for him to start handling his own finances. You know, adulthood, it's trending these days. Heather actually snorted before catching herself. Evelyn shot her a glare. Brandon's face went pale. "You're kidding, right? You can't just stop." "I can," I said, and I did. I took another sip of wine. "You'll figure it out. You're smart. You once said college was a scam anyway. Now's your chance to prove it." Laughter from Heather again. This time she didn't even try to hide it. Melissa's voice rose, shaking between anger and embarrassment. "This isn't funny, Luke. You can't humiliate us like this." I looked at her calmly. "Us? No, Melissa. Just him. You and your family handled that part years ago." Evelyn gasped again, clutching her pearls like a caricature from a soap opera. "Luke, really, this is not the time." "You're right," I said. "The time was 6 years ago when I first started paying for your grandson's college while everyone here pretended I didn't exist." Brandon finally found his voice. "Mom, what is he talking about?" "Grandpa paid for my tuition." Melissa's jaw tightened. "Your father said he was paying." I smiled, savoring the moment like a fine dessert. "Wow," I said. "So, he told you Greg was paying, and you believed him. Meanwhile, Greg thinks you were covering it. And all this time, my bank account's been the real scholarship fund. Touching, isn't it?" You could practically hear the mental math happening at that table. Evelyn looked like she was calculating ways to legally disown me. Heather leaned forward, whispering, "Wait, so? Luke paid for all of it." Melissa didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was the confession. Brandon finally stood, his chair scraping back. "That's not fair. You can't just cut me off like that." I smiled. "Actually, that's exactly how fairness works. You earn something, you keep it. You don't, it stops coming. Welcome to adulthood." The tension in the room was delicious. Years of swallowed pride, forced smiles, and invisible labor condensed into one perfect moment. Melissa's face had gone from rage to realization, because deep down, she knew this wasn't just about money. It was about power. I'd finally taken mine back. Evelyn stood, probably hoping to reclaim control. "I think that's enough," she said sharply. I looked at her, still calm. "Oh, we're just getting started, Evelyn. I've been quiet for a long time. Too long. And tonight, I just wanted to say thank you." She frowned. "For what?" "For teaching me what family really means. It's not blood or marriage or shared dinners. It's respect. And since I haven't seen much of that here, I'll be taking mine to go." With that, I stood, adjusted my jacket, and placed my napkin neatly on the table. Brandon was muttering under his breath, Melissa was red-faced, and Evelyn looked one pearl short of a breakdown. I glanced around the table, smiled, and said, "Thank you for dinner." The steak was under-seasoned, but the drama? Perfectly cooked. As I walked out, I could hear Evelyn whisper, "He's lost his mind." And Melissa yelling, "We'll talk about this at home." I didn't turn around. I just smiled wider. Outside, the air was crisp, the city lights shimmered, and I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone buzzed. Probably Melissa, but I ignored it. I'd already said everything that needed saying. That dinner didn't just expose the truth, it ended the illusion. I'd spent years trying to belong to a family that saw me as a paycheck with legs. But walking out of that mansion, I realized I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. And I definitely didn't need their wine. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Free from pretense, free from debt, free from pretending to be part of something that had never really included me. And that, my friends, is how you turn humiliation into liberation, with a calm voice, a steady smile, and one perfectly timed sentence that makes everyone at the table realize the free ride's officially over. If you've never been yelled at by a woman holding a $400 bottle of Merlot, let me tell you, it's like being in a Shakespeare play directed by a tornado. The dinner had barely ended before Melissa's phone call started. 5 missed calls, 2 texts, and 1 dramatic voicemail that began with, "I can't believe you embarrassed me," and ended with, "You're not the man I married." I listened to it twice, mostly because it was hilarious. Technically, she was right. I wasn't the man she married. That guy was quiet, compliant, and believed in teamwork. This guy was calm, caffeinated, and financially free. The next morning, I woke up to find our house eerily silent. Melissa had packed a few bags and left a note on the counter that said, "I'm staying at Mom's for a few days to think," which was Carter code for, "I need reinforcements and Wi-Fi that actually works." I made coffee, turned on the radio, and smiled. For the first time in 6 years, the house felt like mine. No arguments, no guilt trips, no Brandon asking for gas money. It was beautiful. By noon, I got a call from Jake. "So," he said, "how was the dinner?" I laughed. Picture an explosion, then multiply it by family dysfunction. He whistled. "That good, huh?" "Better," I said. "I think I might finally sleep tonight." He chuckled. "Welcome back to the land of self-respect." Around 2 p.m., I got an email that made my day even better. It was from Brandon's university, politely notifying me that his tuition payment was overdue. The irony was delicious. I opened the portal just to watch the red, overdue notification blink like a neon sign saying karma is real. I didn't delete my account. I kept it. I wanted to see the aftermath unfold in real time. Later that evening, Melissa called again. This time, I picked up. "Luke," she said sharply, "what did you do?" "What did I do?" I repeated. "You mean besides pay for 6 years of education and a car I didn't drive?" "Don't be sarcastic," she snapped. "Brandon's tuition portal says overdue. Did you cancel it?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Yup." Silence. Then, "You can't just stop without telling us." "I did tell you," I said. "At dinner. You were there, wearing red, holding a glass of wine you didn't finish." She huffed. "You're being petty." "Petty is not buying him another iPhone when he drops his. This is accountability." "He's just a kid," she said. "He's 22. I replied. At that age, I was working construction and living off tuna sandwiches. He can handle life without my debit card. She didn't respond right away. Then she said quietly, "He thought his dad was paying." I chuckled. "Yeah, and his dad thought you were paying. So technically, I've been the mystery donor in your family's little scam." She gasped. "It wasn't a scam." "You're right," I said. "A scam implies planning. This was just carelessness with better lighting." After that, she hung up. I didn't call back. I wasn't mad. I was free. I spent that night reorganizing my office, deleting old payment records, and rediscovering what silence sounded like when it wasn't laced with tension. The next day, I went for a drive. No destination, just me, my truck, and a playlist of songs I hadn't listened to in years because Melissa said they were too depressing. The irony? They sounded like freedom. Over the next week, word spread through the Carter family faster than gossip at a church picnic. Heather called first, pretending to check in. "I heard things got heated," she said. "Heard from who?" I asked. "Melissa, of course. She's devastated." I laughed. Is she devastated because she lost a husband, or because she lost an unlimited expense account? Silence. Then, softly, "You know how she is." "Yeah," I said. "And for 6 years, I knew how to pay for it." Evelyn called next, her voice dripping with fake civility. "Luke, Dear, I just wanted to remind you that families go through rough patches. I said, right. But this one feels more like a clearance sale. She gasped. You can't just walk away from responsibilities. Evelyn, I said sweetly, responsibilities go both ways. I handled mine for 6 years. Now it's your daughter's turn. She muttered something about ungrateful men and hung up. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The best part, though, watching Brandon implode from a distance. He blocked me on social media, which was adorable, considering I still had access to his university email. Every time another late payment notice arrived, I smiled. Not out of cruelty, but out of poetic justice. For once, life was teaching him what I never could. Money doesn't grow in stepdad accounts. Meanwhile, my days became peaceful. I started cooking for myself again. Nothing fancy, just actual meals instead of takeout leftovers. I fixed up the backyard, finally repaired that leaky faucet Melissa had been waiting for a professional to handle, and rediscovered hobbies that didn't involve paying other people's bills. I even slept better. Turns out, when your phone stops buzzing with urgent requests, your brain stops buzzing too. Jake came by one weekend with a six-pack. You seem happier, he said, cracking open a beer. Lighter. I cut 50 pounds of emotional debt, I said. Her name's Melissa. He laughed so hard he nearly choked. You're really not going back, are you? I shook my head. Nope. She can think at her mom's mansion all she wants. I've already thought enough for both of us. A few days later, I got another call from Melissa. This one wasn't angry. It was desperate. Luke, she said, they froze his account. He can't register for next semester. I smiled. Sounds like a teachable moment. He's your son, she snapped. No, Melissa, I said softly. He's your son. I was just the funding department. She started crying then. The manipulative kind of crying where every sob is a negotiation tactic. I didn't know Luke. He told me Greg was paying. I thought you knew. And yet neither of you asked any questions while the tuition fairy kept delivering. She sniffled. So what now? Now, I said. Now you both learn how it feels to live without assuming someone else will fix it. She didn't respond. Just hung up. That night, I poured myself a drink, sat on the porch, and watched the sunset over the maple tree. The same tree where I'd made my decision weeks earlier. Everything looked the same, but it felt different. The house was still, the air was crisp, and for the first time, I felt genuinely proud. Not for what I'd done for them, but for what I'd finally done for myself. A few days later, Jake texted, "How's freedom treating you?" I replied, "Cheaper than therapy." He sent a laughing emoji and then added, "Don't backslide. You've earned peace. Keep it." And I did. I started saving again, watching that peace fund grow like a plant finally getting sunlight. Every deposit felt like another layer of my sanity returning. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need an apology. The real victory was silence, the kind that comes when the noise of manipulation finally fades. Melissa stayed at her mother's for over a week. When she finally came back, she didn't have her usual glow. She looked tired, deflated, almost human. She said, "I've been thinking." I said, "That's new." She ignored the jab. "I should have communicated better," she admitted. "And I should have appreciated what you did." I nodded. "You should have." But appreciation with interest is hard to collect. She asked if we could start fresh. I didn't say no, but I didn't say yes either. I just said, "We'll see." Because I wasn't angry anymore. I was cautious. She'd have to earn her way back. Not with promises or tears, but with honesty. When she went to bed, I checked my phone one last time. Another overdue notice from Brandon's school. I smiled, closed the email, and turned off the light. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just hums quietly in the background while you drink coffee and enjoy the peace you paid for. Finally, with your own happiness instead of your wallet. There's this weird quiet that follows chaos. The kind that feels like standing in the middle of a field after a tornado. You're surrounded by wreckage. But for the first time, you can actually breathe. That's what the weeks after the dinner felt like. Melissa was home again, but something between us had shifted. We weren't fighting, not exactly. We were suspended. Polite strangers sharing a mortgage. She tiptoed around me like I was a wild animal that might bite if startled, and I pretended to read the news while listening for signs of remorse. None came. The once bubbly woman who used to hum through mornings now sat in silence over coffee, scrolling her phone, probably waiting for her mother's next piece of advice. And me? I was discovering the strange luxury of indifference. Then, one gray Thursday morning, my phone buzzed. Brandon. My first thought was that the apocalypse must be here. I stared at his name for a full minute before answering. Hey, I said. Luke, he began, voice hesitant. So, have you thought about changing your mind? I nearly laughed. About what? Basic math or natural consequences? He sighed. About the tuition. I can't go back this semester. I'm on academic probation. The school says I can fix it if I pay off what's owed. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. Sounds like an opportunity to finally use that business major you've been talking about. This isn't funny, he snapped. I could lose my spot. Then maybe you should have treated it like it cost something, I said. Because it did. Me. There was silence on the line, the kind that felt like a car idling before stalling. Then he muttered, You're unbelievable, and hung up. I didn't get mad. I didn't even sigh. I just chuckled and went back to my coffee. For the first time, I wasn't letting guilt drive the conversation. Melissa must have overheard, because she came into the kitchen a few minutes later, wearing her robe and that tired expression that used to mean, I stayed up late worrying, but now meant Mom told me to fix this. She said, He's struggling, Luke. I didn't look up. He's learning, I corrected. She crossed her arms. You've made your point. I smiled. No, Melissa. Life's making mine. She tried to guilt-trip me for a few more days. You were always like a father to him, she'd say. He looks up to you. He used to look down at me from your family's dinner table, I said. Big difference. Eventually, even she gave up. She stopped talking about Brandon altogether, which was progress. I think part of her realized that my silence wasn't just financial. It was emotional, too. For years, I'd been the fixer, the peacemaker, the guy who kept things smooth while everyone else stomped around spilling entitlement everywhere. But now I'd checked out, and suddenly, the engine didn't run without me. A few weeks later, Jake dragged me out to a comedy open mic at a local bar. You need to laugh again, he said, or at least watch other people bomb worse than your marriage did. I rolled my eyes, but went anyway. The first few acts were terrible. One guy did 5 minutes on traffic cones. But somewhere between the bad jokes and cheap beer, I realized I was laughing. Not politely, not out of habit, genuinely laughing, shoulders shaking, stomach hurting, the whole thing. And that's when it hit me. Humor had always been my survival tool. Somewhere along the line, I'd stopped using it. I'd traded sarcasm for silence, laughter for obligation. So when Jake nudged me and said, You could do better than half these guys, I said, You know what? Maybe I could. The following week, I went back to perform. I signed up under the name The Financial Stepdad. When they called me up, I grabbed the mic and said, Hey everyone, I'm Luke. I've been funding other people's bad decisions for 6 years, and I'm finally sober. The crowd laughed, and something in me cracked open. I told stories about paying for a stepson's tuition, about buying a car labeled Stepdad Sponsored, about a dinner that turned into a hostage negotiation with champagne. Every punchline was a release, every laugh from the audience a reminder that my pain had value after all. It was comedy gold. For 10 minutes, I wasn't a husband or a stepdad or a paycheck. I was just a guy owning his story. When I got off stage, Jake was in the back, clapping like a proud parent. You crushed it, he said. You realize you just turned your trauma into stand-up? I grinned. Cheaper than therapy. That night, I drove home with the windows down, feeling alive for the first time in years. The air felt different, lighter, cleaner, like the world had been fumigated of all the manipulation I used to breathe in. The next morning, Melissa was in the kitchen again, sipping coffee like she hadn't almost lost a marriage over entitlement. You were out late, she said cautiously. Yeah, I said, telling jokes about my life. Her brow furrowed. Like us. I smiled. No, about me. Which was true, technically. She didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer any. That was the new rule. Minimal words, maximum peace. Then something unexpected happened. A month later, Brandon called again. Not to argue. Not to guilt-trip me. To talk. Hey, he said awkwardly. Just wanted you to know. I got a job. I blinked. Really? Yeah, he said. Car dealership. Sales trainee. It's different. I smirked. Selling cars you can't afford yet? He laughed nervously. Pretty much. I chuckled. Good. Poetic, actually. He hesitated, then said quietly, I was mad at you, you know. Yeah, I said. I'm used to it. But you were right, he admitted. I needed to figure it out. That line hit harder than I expected. It wasn't a full apology, but it was close enough to sound like growth. Proud of you, kid, I said. Don't blow it. Trying not to, he said, then hung up before either of us could ruin the moment. I sat there, smiling at the phone, realizing that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally started his own chapter. As for Melissa, things slowly changed. She stopped defending Brandon's every mistake. She started working again, taking small freelance gigs instead of waiting for her mother's next bailout. One evening, she came home tired but smiling, holding takeout instead of receipts. I forgot how good it feels to earn something, she said. I nodded. Yeah, it's addictive. For the first time in forever, her laughter didn't sound performative. We weren't magically healed. This wasn't a movie, but there was honesty now, and that was worth more than all the polished dinners in Manhattan. One night, she even asked, "Do you think we can start over?" I thought about it for a while before answering. Maybe, but not like before. No more masks. No more pretending we're the perfect family. Just us, flawed, honest, and hopefully debt-free. She smiled. Deal. Months passed, and I kept performing at that comedy club. People started recognizing me. Hey, it's the stepdad guy, they'd shout. Some even asked for advice after shows. How do you move on after betrayal? One guy asked. I told him, simple. You start small. Cut off one toxic payment at a time. The crowd laughed, but I meant every word. Because freedom doesn't come all at once. It's a collection of small, quiet choices that add up to a new life. By spring, things with Brandon were surprisingly civil. He'd drop by sometimes, still awkward, but less entitled. Once, he even brought me coffee. You like black, right? He said. I stared at him, stunned. Yeah, thanks. He nodded, uncomfortable, then added, I know I was a jerk. Mom said you forgave me. I smiled. Forgiveness is free. Tuition isn't. He laughed, and for the first time, it wasn't forced. That laugh meant more than any apology could. Melissa and I kept rebuilding. Not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent moments. Movie nights, walks, shared jokes that didn't involve insults. She finally told her family the truth, that I'd been paying for everything all along. Evelyn nearly fainted. Heather stopped speaking to her for a month, and suddenly, I wasn't the practical one anymore. I was Luke, the generous one. I didn't care for their newfound respect. It felt transactional. But watching Melissa stand up for me for the first time, that was priceless. One weekend, while trimming the maple tree out front, Melissa came out with lemonade and said, You know, for someone who used to hate this house, you're awfully protective of it now. I looked at her, smiling. That's because it finally feels like mine. She nodded, understanding. The air between us felt different, lighter, safer, real. By the end of that year, everything had changed. Brandon was working full-time, paying his own rent. Melissa had launched her own business, small, but honest this time. And me? I turned my story into something that made people laugh, think, and maybe even learn a little. Sometimes after shows, strangers would come up to me and say, Man, your story sounds like my life. I'd smile and say, Then here's the moral. Don't let anyone convince you that peace is selfish. It's the most responsible thing you can pay for. And as I drive home under the glow of the city lights, windows down, the world humming in quiet contentment, I'd think back to that dinner, that maple tree, and that moment I finally said no. Funny thing about freedom, it doesn't come with applause or fireworks. It comes with silence. The good kind. The kind that means you've finally stopped being everyone else's solution and started being your own. 2 years later, if you walked into my life, you'd barely recognize the man who once flinched every time his phone buzzed with a "Hey Luke, can you help with?" message. The house was still the same one I built piece by piece, but it finally felt like home. The maple tree out front had grown taller, fuller, almost smug, like it knew it had witnessed my reawakening. The silence that used to feel awkward now sounded like music. There were no sudden shouts, no guilt-drenched sighs, no financial emergencies disguised as love. Just peace. Sweet, steady, well-earned peace. And the irony? The very people who once laughed at me for being too practical were now asking me how I managed to stay sane. Karma really does have a sense of humor. Brandon was the first surprise. One Saturday morning, I was fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there he was, older, calmer, less shiny. His posture didn't scream arrogance anymore. It whispered humility. He held 2 cups of coffee and said, "I didn't know if you still took it black." I smirked. "Still do. You remember that?" "Yeah," he said, stepping inside. "Guess some things stick." He looked around like he was seeing the place for the first time, even though he'd spent most of his teenage years here pretending it was beneath him. "You've made some changes," he said, noticing the new paint and the lack of clutter. "Yeah," I said, "mainly removed everything that didn't add value." I raised an eyebrow at him. He laughed. "Okay, I deserve that." We sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee like 2 people trying to rebuild something without saying it out loud. "So," I said, "still working at the dealership?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Been there 2 years. Got promoted last month." "Good for you," I said. "Selling cars or dreams?" He grinned. "A little of both. But hey, I'm earning my own mistakes now." That line hit me. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. "You know," he said quietly, "I didn't get it before. I thought you were just being cruel when you stopped paying. But now, after paying my own rent, fixing my own messes, I get it." I nodded. Tough lessons stick better when they're not prepaid. He smiled, then reached into his pocket and slid an envelope across the table. "It's not much," he said, "but it's a start." I opened it. 5 crisp $100 bills. "For what?" I asked. "Back pay," he said, grinning. "Interest to follow when I'm rich." I laughed. "If you keep this up, I might even give you back the stepdad-sponsored bumper sticker." He groaned. "God, I was such a jerk." "Yeah," I said, "but now you're just mildly annoying." That's progress. Melissa walked in then, still in her pajamas, hair messy but eyes softer than I remembered. She froze for a moment seeing us together. "Coffee?" she asked. "Already got it," Brandon said, holding up his cup. The look between them wasn't perfect. It carried history, guilt, forgiveness, and something new. Respect. After he left, she turned to me and said, "You handled that better than I expected." I shrugged. Turns out silence teaches better than lectures. She smiled faintly. "You were right about him." "Finally," I said. "Took me a decade." Our marriage had gone through its own rehab. We didn't fix everything overnight. There were months of cautious coexisting, awkward dinners, and deep talks that sometimes ended in tears and sometimes in laughter. But there was honesty now, raw, uncomfortable, healing honesty. Melissa started therapy on her own, something I never thought she'd do. She even apologized to me in full sentences, without excuses or qualifiers. "I was chasing appearances," she admitted one night while we were cleaning up after dinner. "I thought keeping up meant winning. But all I did was lose the only person who actually stood by me." I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the polished Carter facade. I saw Melissa, the woman who once made me believe love could be simple. "You didn't lose me," I said softly. "You just misplaced your priorities." She laughed through tears. "You and your dad jokes." "Hey," I said, "they've gotten me this far." Evelyn, on the other hand, took longer to evolve. When Melissa finally told her the truth, that I had funded Brandon's entire education, the car, and half the family's emergencies, Evelyn's face reportedly went through all 5 stages of grief in one sitting. Denial, "That's impossible." Anger, "How dare he not tell us?" Bargaining, "Well, he did marry into privilege." Depression, "I need a drink." And, eventually, acceptance, "He's actually quite dependable." Now she treats me like I invented electricity. "Luke, dear," she coos at family gatherings, "you've always been so reliable." I just smile and sip my drink, thinking, you used to call me the practical one. Funny how money you can no longer access suddenly turns into admiration. But I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd found something better, contentment. It's a strange thing to get used to after years of chaos. You start noticing the little luxuries, like coming home to quiet, or making dinner without an argument over which wine pairs with forgiveness. I took up woodworking again, something I hadn't done since college. Built a coffee table, a few shelves, even a bench for the backyard under the maple tree. Every nail I hammered in felt like closure. One afternoon, while sanding the bench, Melissa came outside with 2 lemonades. "You really love that tree," she said, handing me a glass. "That tree saved my sanity," I said. "It's where I realized I didn't need to be the hero in someone else's story." She smiled. "And now?" I looked up at the branches swaying in the wind. Now I just enjoy the view. We started traveling again, not to impress anyone, just to breathe. Weekend trips to quiet towns, road trips with no destinations. Melissa stopped documenting everything for social media. She started living instead of performing. We even took a trip to Maine last fall. Sitting by the ocean, she turned to me and said, "I used to think success was about what people saw, but the happiest I've ever been was when no one's watching." I raised my cup of coffee and said, "Welcome to the club." Meanwhile, I kept doing stand-up. It became less of a hobby and more of a purpose. People came up to me after shows saying, "Man, your story's my story." I'd laugh and say, "Then I hope your sequel's better." I never named names, of course, but everyone in the audience knew exactly what kind of chaos I was describing. The toxic expectations, the emotional blackmail, the guilt-edged gratitude. My favorite line was always, "If you ever feel useless, just remember I once paid 6 years of tuition for a kid who thought Wi-Fi was a personality trait." It killed every time. The real kicker came one night after a show when a man around my age approached me. "I'm Brandon's boss," he said, extending a hand. "He talks about you a lot." My stomach dropped, thinking, oh great, now I'm a punchline in his dealership too. But the guy smiled. He said you taught him more about responsibility by saying no than anyone ever did by saying yes. Thought you should know he's doing great. I was quiet for a moment, then said, "Yeah, the kid's all right." On the drive home, I couldn't stop grinning. Karma was working overtime. That winter, Brandon invited us to dinner, his treat. I didn't know whether to laugh or get suspicious. When we arrived, he'd actually cooked. Nothing fancy, just pasta, garlic bread, and a nervous grin. "If it's bad," he said, "just pretend it's expensive." We sat down, ate, and talked. Not about money or guilt or the past, just about life. He told me about his plans to start night school, how he wanted to study business management for real this time. "I want to build something," he said. "Something that's mine." I raised my glass. "Just make sure it doesn't have my name on the payments." We all laughed. For once, it wasn't awkward. It was real. After dinner, Melissa hugged him tight, and I noticed something different in her too. Pride. Not the showy kind she used to flaunt at her family dinners, but quiet, genuine pride. On the drive home, she said, "You know, I used to think peace was boring." I laughed. "That's because you were addicted to drama." She nodded. "And you were addicted to fixing things." "Yeah," I said. "Now I just fix tables." She smiled, taking my hand. I like this version of us. 2 years after that infamous dinner, everything had come full circle. We weren't perfect, but we were peaceful, and in this world, that's close enough to paradise. Every so often, Melissa's relatives would invite us to their fancy functions, and we'd go, not to fit in, but to quietly enjoy how uncomfortable honesty made them. Evelyn would brag about her self-made son-in-law, and I'd just sip my drink, thinking, if only she knew how freeing it feels to not need her approval anymore. Now, when people ask me, "How did you forgive them?" I tell them the truth. Forgiveness isn't some big, dramatic gesture. It's waking up one morning, realizing you don't owe anyone your peace, and deciding to keep it that way. Every time my phone doesn't buzz with a money request, that's forgiveness. Every time I laugh without checking who's offended, that's healing. Every time I look at that maple tree and remember how it all started, that's gratitude. Because in the end, karma doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shows up quietly, sipping coffee at your kitchen table, wearing a humble smile, saying, "Thanks for teaching me." And when that happens, you don't need revenge, validation, or applause. Just a cup of peace, a dash of humor, and the kind of silence that finally feels like home.